the craziest thing, when I was much younger, I would at times cry myself to sleep at the thought that one day I might lose my parents.
It's a pretty wild thought for a kid to have. Normally they're thinking of, when can I get my next Lego? I would have thought you would be thinking that.
That is also a thought, still to this day, that I have. Dad died on the Friday. I had an exam on Monday. The university, they said, you have to sit this exam.
I mean, I'm not a swearing type, but I feel like in that moment I would have wanted to swear at those people.
Oh, shit. Totally. When I heard someone had lost their dad specifically, I wanted to hear from them how they were doing. And so just trying to glean as much as possible. Like, you're saying there's a future after this? We were just so unprepared for it. I think in the West, we're just so unprepared for grief. We don't do it well. And I guess that's why we've sort of birthed this podcast. And
Welcome to the Good Grief Podcast.
it's awesome to have you back. We were just laughing about how we try and announce this show from here on in, because this is episode number 2.
Yeah. So if you're just joining us, make sure you catch episode number 1.
Yeah, go back, scroll back.
Yes.
You don't want to miss episode number 1, and I can say that because it's all about Kaylee and her grief. And there's lots of laughs. There are some tears. There are some just epic moments that, man, I took away from that. And I know you've helped a lot of friends with through their grief.
Yeah.
So go back and check that out if you're just getting to number 2. But if you're here for the second time, welcome back.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Grief is crazy and wild, and it can be funny. We were...
In the gym this morning.
Yeah, this isn't funny.
No.
But it goes to show...
All the facets, the many facets of grief.
Yeah, how many people it just affects.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ben was in the gym and he said, what are you guys up to today? And we said, well, we're filming a podcast. He said, on what? And we're like, oh, just on grief, you know.
Of all things.
Light and fun, as you do. And he goes, oh, wow. He goes, man, 2 of my employees in the same week both had stillborn babies.
Yeah.
Stillbirths.
Yeah.
Is that the right term?
Yeah, stillbirths.
Oh, man. And we're like, far out. He goes, maybe this podcast can help.
Yeah.
And so we're like, cool, let's get it in their hands. And
We'll let you know when it's out.
yeah, that's right, when the episode drops.
Yeah.
But it's far and wide reaching. And then the other side of it is, man, this week I love some of the grief memes that pop up on our Instagram feed.
Yes.
Red carpet, is it
Henry
Henry
Cavill.
Henry Cavill, Superman.
AKA Superman.
Yeah, I just know him as Superman.
Yeah.
And he's just in his, fresh looking suit, and you've got Jason Momoa in his raggedy t-shirt coming up behind him, and the meme is like, going about my business, and then Jason's coming up back just with grief.
Yeah.
Just
Me going about my business, and then grief sneaking up behind me.
Here comes grief sneaking in behind me. Anyway, I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
So we posted it. You can check it out on our Instagram. That's probably that's a good plug.
There you go. Good Grief HQ. Go check it out. Yeah. And all the other things.
I think
just many good things.
I just think laughter's good medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't know by now, we are wanting to bring laughter to this grief journey because we all need it.
Yeah. We actually put up a little swipey, thing in our stories as well that said, laughter is just needed sometimes. And it had 100% of people swipe that little thing all the way to the end.
They swipe that thing.
Yeah. And I've done a lot of those things on social media in the years, and I've never seen like 100% just bang, bang, bang. So yeah, if you're listening at home.
We're hearing you.
We're hearing you. We're listening to the people. We want to balance the joy and the tears along the way because they're both needed and valued.
You know what else is needed?
I don't know what.
I don't know what I'm going to say. Ice cream socks. I love my ice cream socks.
True.
So I thought I'd wear them today.
I've got Star.
So you guys can.
I've got Star Wars socks on.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyway.
should we dive in?
Yeah, let's dive in.
What are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about you and your dad.
Me and my dad. Yep.
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about your dad.
Cool. Christopher Gilmary Bowles.
Yeah.
You only found out last night that his names were reversed. No,
yes, he switched his
just
name
like your
just
dad.
like my dad.
Yeah, so.
Must have been a 70s thing.
Yeah, potentially.
They didn't like.
Uh-huh.
They
In the
got weird
70s.
first names.
Totally. Born in Sri Lanka in 1955, up in the mountains, migrated here in the 70s. Whole family came out here because of war back there. Involved with cars, the way he would describe it is cars, bikes, planes, trains, anything that had an engine and moved, he was all over it. So had mechanical workshops. He ended up helping people buy, their dream cars and get into all sorts of things that we still see his sticker on the back of so many cars around the Gold Coast, Chris Bowles Automotive.
What a legacy.
Yeah, and we grew up Christian. Dad came to know the Lord through Billy Graham Crusade.
Wow.
And so thank you, Billy. And, went on to lead his family to the Lord as well. And we sort of just grew up in an incredible home. Him and Mum married for 29 years.
Same as my parents.
Before he died. And so, yeah, he raised us on cricket and curries. Not that he could cook. Mum learnt all of the cooking. My mum's Australian.
Yep.
And I've got one younger brother, Jordan, as well.
So good. So what was your relationship like with your dad?
The best.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, my hero. Like, he taught me how to love. He taught me how to do business. The way I saw him do business with people was like nothing else. And I think that showed at the funeral when it was full of, yes, family and friends, but just clients and people from over the years, all the people he did business with. And I think that was a huge testament to the way he carried himself and handled and loved people.
100%. Like, we meet people and I'm only just meeting them, but they'll talk about your dad just like that.
Totally.
Yeah.
And just cry.
Never heard a bad word about your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And same about your mum. It's pretty special.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so relationship was just always one of fun and love.
He was a jokester.
Yeah. Total prankster. I think that's why I spent a lot of time out of the classroom as well, following in his footsteps, which I didn't realize until after the fact. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So take us to the day. Your story is a bit different to mine.
Yeah, it's very
sudden.
Very different.
Yeah.
It was November 9th, 2012. I was studying for a uni exam.
How old are you?
Well, I'm not the best with... I don't know how old I am right now.
I think you would have been 23.
A year younger than you.
Yeah, I was 24.
Okay, thank you. For those listening in, I literally don't care how old I am right now, so much so that my birthday this year, I said, am I 35? Kelly's
It's like, no, I'm 35. You're 34.
Yeah, you're the cougar. That's right. Okay, so yeah, November 9th, I was in a library near home studying with my best bud at the time, Toby. He was way smarter than I am, and so, it made sense to buddy up with him so I could look over his shoulder and,
Total sense.
and glean all of the good stuff. And
Thanks, Toby.
And I got a phone call from Mum coming through, and my phone wasn't on Do Not Disturb like it is most of the time these days. And I thought, I can probably answer this later. I need to get this study done. It's Friday, exam is Monday. I want to have time off in the weekend. And it kept ringing. I thought, maybe I should pick it up. Just like something inside of me thought, I'll pick this up. So I answered the phone. Hey, Mum, just studying. What's up? Pretty short.
What's up, Mum? Make it quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I'm busy here.
Yeah. It's better be good.
Her words, from what I can remember, were simply, Ryan, you've got to get home now. I think Dad may have been in an accident.
Whoa.
Yeah. And the reason why it was whoa is because Dad was into flying planes.
Right.
And unbeknownst to me or my brother, he'd actually bought his own plane and had it shipped over here, and Dad had it put together, and his goal was to have this family plane that he could fly us to Hamilton Island or destinations around Australia and take his family personally on these trips. And so he usually flew most Friday mornings. That was sort of his end or start of the weekend. I hadn't put sort of 2 and 2 together. You know, to me, it's a Friday. I'm studying flat out for an exam. But as soon as Mum says Dad may have been in an accident, immediately I knew he must have been flying. And so, you know, I didn't even have time I didn't close up my books, nothing. I just said to Tobes, I said, dude, I got to go. Take care of my stuff and I'll talk to you later. And I ran out of that library, got in the car, and I don't know how fast I did to get home, well above the speed limit. It was just such a blur, and like all of these emotions and thoughts and trying to keep them out of the back of my mind. Dad always said, you know, why worry? It won't add another second to your life. And so I'm trying to keep inside of me control of all of the what ifs and just be objective about it, get home, find out the scenario, you know, get the facts before all this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I got home and came in to find Mum she was at home alone. We were all at home at the time. She was a mess, just, you know, absolute mess, trying to get out of her what had happened. And she said that she received a call. She picked up. It was an unknown number, picked up, and it was like the Sydney Herald of sorts. We're up in Queensland. Sydney Herald, one of the major newspapers down there. A journalist was calling, and the first question was like, "Hi, Mrs. Bowles, just calling about your husband who's recently been in a crash, and we'd love to interview you." And Mum thought that it was just a wrong number, and so she hung up. And then a second call came from another journalist and paper somewhere down there. And at that point, sort of it clicked. Oh my God, Dad, you know, or Chris, her husband, my dad, is flying.
This can't be 2 pranks.
Yeah, it can't be 2. It's not, you know, he's not just doing his normal day to day. He's out flying. That's when she called me. And then so she's trying to...
It makes me so mad, those people calling.
Oh, yeah.
Like, to think that they got wind of this before you guys had heard, and they thought, how about we, like, this is so fresh, like, within hours, how about we call the family and ask for an interview?
Yeah.
Like, that sounds like a good idea. Makes me so mad.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how you guys felt in that moment.
Totally. I mean, to think that, like, the trauma that causes, far out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and then if I skip forward a bit, we had journalists, news, you know, reporters coming up our driveway. We've got this sort of like 50, 60 meter long steep hill driveway. Steep.
Yeah.
And so we could see them from our veranda, cars parked, people coming up the driveway.
The same day?
Yeah, same day.
Wow.
And so I had to tell them where to go, you know.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, that's a whole nother side of things. And then we had journalists with long lens cameras.
You should have got the BB guns out.
Yeah, we had slug guns and things, like could have done all sorts of damage. Don't put those things past me, but you know, we had people capturing photos from like across the valley into our home and so forth, like just
like long
wild
distance
stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, like telescopic cameras.
Wow.
Anyway, coming back to the moment.
Where's your brother?
Yeah, he was at Dad's workshop working on his car.
Mm-hmm.
So my brother was into cars. I'm into cars. I'm just not mechanically into them. And so he's working on his car, and you know, Mum's called him by now, and he's on his way home. When he gets home, we're sort of all, it's just the 3 of us trying to work out what's happening, and so much uncertainty. Can't get a hold of obviously Dad or anybody else. I'm in my room trying to get onto police to find out what's happened and any information at all. The officer said, we're sending 2, policemen down to the scene. We'll be in touch. So back with the family, I don't know what time was like during that. I don't know if it was minutes or hours or just moments. But eventually I got a call back. I stepped out into my own room again, and he said, Ryan, calling to let you know we've reached the scene. We've found the aircraft and 2 deceased confirmed at the scene. And that happened to be my dad and his co-pilot as well. So now I've got the burden and the only one that has this confirmed to leave my room to find my family again in the lounge room. And it felt like, you know, at that point on, I was already sort of the man of the house.
Yeah.
And to deliver this news was like...
The baton had been passed to you in that moment.
Yeah, and like a necessary evil that I don't want to share this news with them as much as they probably sense it already coming. But I walked out there and I didn't have to say anything. They just knew. And my mum, I can remember where she was sitting in her favourite chair. She just collapsed into nothing and broke down. And my brother, he bolted for the back door. He wanted to get out of there. And so I grabbed him and tackled him. I've never been a contact sportsman, but in that moment I knew how to put a tackle on. I just knew that if he got out the door, you know, anything could have happened. And, you know, he's 3 years younger than me, so, you know, he could have been unwise, got in a car, which is just not the right place to be. And so I put him on the ground and just held him down as long as it took for that initial anger response to sort of reside. And we had mum and dad's sort of best friends on their way at the time. And when they got to our back door, man, that was a huge relief. It was just giving somebody a hug. Like the 3 of us are sort of unconsolable, and just to give somebody a hug that's, you know, got their feet on solid ground at that point just meant the world to us.
Yeah.
And that was the darkest day that I've walked through, you know. And
100%.
And I remember at the time the clouds rolled in on that day and it started raining, and I just felt it so fitting, you know, just to, I guess, encompass all of our emotions and the darkness. But that was November 9th, almost 11 years ago now. The hardest day I've ever walked through. I have said it for a long time. It's probably changed now that we're married and we're building, you know, our own family and our own home, that would probably have been the hardest day I'll ever walk through and face. And I probably still stick to that, but I don't want to sell myself short of expectations now, just with all the people that were spoken to and the grief journeys. It's pretty rough.
Yeah. And so Dad was a faith-filled man.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So how did his faith affect you, and how was your faith affected in this incident?
Man, the craziest thing, when I was much younger, like, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. My apologies. It must have been around 10 or so. I would at times cry myself to sleep at the thought that one day I might lose my parents.
Wow.
And I can remember feeling silly and stupid and crazy about that. And I remember my parents reassuring me, you know, that they were there. But I just had such a deep love for both of them. They meant so much to me, that I would sometimes just cry at the thought of not having them around. In regards to Dad specifically,
it's a pretty wild thought for a kid to have.
Yeah, and I felt like, you know,
normally they're thinking of, when can I get my next Lego? I would have thought you would be thinking that.
That is also a thought still to this day that I have. Yeah, for sure. But with Dad specifically, on the faith side of things, we would often joke about who would win the race to heaven. You know, how we would live out this life and finish the race and get to, be in the glory
Yeah.
of Jesus. And so we would laugh about that. And so, he obviously finished the race first, but way sooner than expected. But thankfully that gives me like a hope and a peace as well. But just not the way that we wanted it to happen at all.
So you lent in to Faith Church, or?
Yeah, thankfully I was in a really good, strong, solid place with my faith at the time. I was plugged into community. I was plugged into my church. And yeah, I was growing in faith. Very different from mum and my brother, different, their sort of journeys. But I was in a good space. Yeah. So I lent in totally. Not saying that was easy. Like, I can still remember it being hard to sing, hard to lift my hands. But it's definitely, I felt like, man, if I don't have God, I've got nothing in this.
Yeah.
Like, if I don't have a hope that there is more to this life than we experience right now, there's not much point in living. And so I often felt like if that wasn't the case, I wouldn't have had much much worth living for myself. Yeah, the pain was that significant that it could have come to that.
Yeah, wow. And so did you seek out any resources, books, I don't think podcasts are around really then, but...
No, they weren't weren't a huge thing.
You guys...
I encouraged Mum...
Yeah.
That she needed to see somebody specifically. It was devastating for Mum. They had a trip planned to France for their 30th anniversary, wedding anniversary. And so it was just, they worked side by side.
Yeah.
They did everything together, much like you and I.
Us.
And so not many people see us alone, to be honest. And it was the same with them, and never, they had arguments and, chewed over stuff, but never a fight. I think I can only remember Dad raising his voice at me once when he was, really angry or disappointed, like once. And so we just saw the most beautiful example of marriage and love. And so I said to her, you've got to see someone. I'll come with you. It'll probably be good for me as well. And Jordan was reluctant to it. Eventually we found a beautiful Christian counselor named Zia, and a big part of like finding understanding in that relationship was, have you experienced grief? And so she had actually lost her own son. And so, we found that out in the first session, and that was kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, because we've found out that a lot of people who have gone for therapy didn't actually connect with their therapist because they actually hadn't been through grief themselves.
Totally.
Yeah.
And even recently, like with my therapist, like currently, legend, he just set the tone right from the start. He's like, hey man, like if you don't feel like this relationship is one that's worthwhile, like I totally can recommend others to you. And, so I think that's like just an important aside. Like if it's not the first person, there are plenty more out there.
Yeah. Don't give up on the first one.
Yeah, totally.
But do your homework.
So we actually all went as a family, and then she sort of set a bit of a game plan for us that we should come individually after a few sessions. And it was hugely helpful, even if at the time I was young and naive and didn't necessarily want it per se, it was still massive in just processing that. She's Christian, she's been through grief, she's a mother. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said that your good family friends came around. Who else, or what did they help with, and what else did other people help with?
Mum and Dad had 2 businesses at the time, and so they just took over everything. They thankfully, they knew sort of our business inside and out, and one of them being an accountant or financially, she was taking care of it, taking care of our stuff. So she knew everything where money needed to go,
Yeah.
accounts, all of that stuff. So, man, thankfully, because mum was in no shape to deal with stuff there, we had a car rental business, and dad had mechanical sales and service. So we didn't want to sell those businesses. We just we had about, I don't know, close to 20 cars, and I just sold them off to family and friends just at ridiculous, prices to help them out along the way as well. And so for a time there, I was selling a car every other week to friends and family.
Your dad would love that.
Yeah, he would have. Yeah, absolutely. We had friends down south, Graham and Dorothy, that came up and just stayed with us. They would do that every year anyway, through the winter, to escape the Victorian cold. They came and just stayed with us, cooked for us, cleaned, helped. And sort of those close friends, provided just the most simple but practical help. Just in those early days, where mum couldn't even, lift herself, get herself out of bed.
Yeah. Crazy. So what do you think was most helpful?
In my process,
Yeah.
a bunch of things. I was in a band. I was in a metal band, and, we needed songs. It wasn't necessarily my first thought, but I was used to writing. And so I had an iPhone, one of the early iPhones at the time, and just my notes on there. I'd wake up through the night. I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up in tears or shouting, or reliving the moment. And I just remember just writing. I'd wake up and whatever I'd been thinking or processing, I'd write. And so just these sort of raw, transparent notes filled my note section. That definitely helped. And it's something it's almost cathartic to be able to do that and to look back on those things, to see where I was all that time ago. And then we turned those notes into songs, 2 years later, we wrote an album called Overcomer. And a lot of that was my way of processing grief publicly for the world to hear and to help others on the journey as well. And so I was able to look at those notes, take the best of them, turn them into song, and we created stuff. So writing, journaling.
And you'll still
huge.
get the random person contact you and be like, that album changed my life.
Have you still got shirts that I can buy? No, we don't
Yeah.
have shirts.
You got any limited merch left?
No. They're for my kids. That's it.
I have to say it like they would say it.
Yeah, so writing was massive. I remember because Dad died on the Friday. I had an exam on Monday, and the most inhumane thing ever, the university,
Yeah.
Griffith University, I will name them.
Shame on them.
They wouldn't let me out of that exam. 3 days after my dad's tragically killed, and they said, you have to sit this. I sifted through and found, in their policies that there was reason for compassion. They had grace for compassion, but they didn't consider this one of them. So I had to sit that exam. It was one of the most hardest exams I'd ever sat, not because of the content, but because of the context.
I mean, I'm not a swearing type, but I feel like in that moment I would have wanted to swear at those people.
Oh, it was shit. Totally. Yeah, it was worse than that.
Worse than that.
It was
I would have
worse
wanted
than
to
that.
say worse things.
So I literally scribbled and got out of there. A week later, we had the funeral. Because of the nature of Dad's death, you mentioned the last episode, your mum, they put her in a fridge for your dad to come back from Papua New Guinea to see her. For Dad, there wasn't much left because of the plane crash, and it exploded in flames. And so apart from...
What did they give you?
Yeah, just jewelry, his rings, watch, necklace, those things were given to us in a box. There was no sort of viewing or confirmation or identity or anything like that. I remember my auntie, she went up and took care of that business because it was just horrific. And so we had the funeral a week-ish plus later, which was just weird as well, because usually funerals a somewhat, it might have been longer than a week, a somewhat closer to the time.
I think about a week's pretty normal.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, whatever. Maybe it was just because we were in this weird time
Right.
continuum. But then we had a tour booked, 10 days after. And so we still jumped on a plane and went and played a bunch of shows down in Victoria. And that was my first experience of like being in front of just, a live group of people and sharing that story publicly. Man, that was hard. I just broke down after I remember the first show, it was a festival. After it, I sort of ran out, got out the back, and I was just an absolute mess. But at the same time, the music that we were playing, metal music, was a great outlet for me as well. So music has been huge.
And you told me that one of the guys who actually didn't like you from another band or whatever actually came and said something to you.
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah.
Biggest band in the scene in Australia. I believe they still are. I'm not too involved, but didn't see eye to eye with our beliefs. But I shared my story, and out the back he said, "Ryan, come over here." And I was like, "Man, what's this going to be about?"
Because normally that wasn't a good thing.
Man, he just gave me a hug and
Wow.
just said, shared his condolences and just, I think in that moment it just changed our relationship forever. To the point where, we wrapped up our band, he left his band, and we'd still text and riff and that sort of thing. So it's amazing like what can happen, and the compassion that he showed, I think, was the big shift. It wasn't anything else.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we've heard a lot of people lose friends after funerals and
Totally.
that people disappear. But sometimes
It brings you closer.
it brings you closer.
And that probably leads me to my third thing was like, I just wanted to hear from people that I'd lost someone. I was there with my dad in the car when he got the call from my mum that his sister had just died in hospital due to cancer. I was there, we pulled over. Dad just starts weeping in the car. I'm crying. And I look to the left out of the car and there's this light pole and there's a Jesus loves you sticker on it. And it was a beautiful moment. But so what I'm trying to say is here, we've lost people to suicide, to cancer, to all sorts of things over the years. What I wanted, now that I'd finally experienced it, was to just be with others.
Yeah.
And so I was like, when I heard someone had lost their dad specifically, I wanted to hear from them how they were doing. And so, another dude, Isaac, he was like a year ahead of the journey from me, and I was just trying to glean as much as possible. Like, you're saying there's a future after this? Like, I can actually get to a point where I start living again. So, 3 would have been seeking out people.
Yep.
Reading has always been huge, and I picked up before we flew to New Zealand for a tour, which was just in the new year, so only a few months later, picked up a book by C.S. Lewis called A Grief Observed. It's a tiny book for anyone wanting to pick it up. Tiny book, but I didn't know C.S. Lewis. I knew him as Narnia and everything else that he did in his life, but I didn't know anything about his personal journey. And his wife Joy died of cancer 4 years after they got married.
Crazy.
And you just think, wow, like a man who's written and so well revered also had to experience grief on such a different scale. And so that book changed my perception on my own grief, because there's a point in the story where he talks about his losing his wife and saying that he would just question God. Why? And why can't I have her back? And wishing her back and praying her back, until he came to this revelation from God that if God was to send his wife back, that she would have to suffer death a second time. And he realized in that moment how selfish he was in wishing her back. And so for me, it was sort of like, it was almost like this cold turkey kind of moment of like wishing Dad back. But why would I want him back to experience death a second time when he's already done it once? Like, I wouldn't wish that upon anybody, especially knowing where he is.
Knowing what he's experiencing.
In glory.
To pull him out of that.
With Christ, where he always longed to be. So yeah, reading was probably, that book helped. The Bible, obviously, well, for me, it helped. I know for others, it raises questions when it comes to loss. But probably 2 scriptures. In Psalms, I believe it is, I can't quote the Psalm, Google it. It says that I've lost it now. Let me jump to Philippians. I'll come back to Psalms.
Let's go to Philippians.
Actually, no, I got Psalms.
Okay.
I believe it says that precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints.
Yes.
And so, that brought me comfort. But more so Philippians. Philippians 4, it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but through prayer and thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which supersedes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And for me, that is the one I just clung to. Yeah, I grabbed onto that, and I would just pray that over myself, over my family, and still to this day, those who are grieving or going through things, it's praying for that peace that surpasses all understanding.
Yeah, that's what we're praying over all our listeners.
Yeah.
All our followers.
Yeah, if you're listening to this, if you're experiencing grief yourself or somebody else in your world, we're continually praying for you and over you as well.
Everyone we'll come in contact with.
Yeah, so they were probably like 5 biggies for me.
Okay.
Journaling, music, people, books, and the Word.
Yeah.
Which is a book.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The best book. So this has been awesome. If you could wrap up your journey so far and go back in time and give your younger self, some advice, what would that be?
Oh, man. It's a tough one. It's really tough. I felt like we just, stuff had to happen. Like I had to go to uni. We had this tour to play. I'm not sure if more time off would have been helpful. You went back to work a week later.
Yeah.
But maybe I would have searched out more community. I can only remember a couple of people that had been on that journey as well. Maybe I would have searched out some more to glean from the way that they'd done it.
Yep.
I just don't think there's any right or wrong way.
Totally.
And I just know that we were just so unprepared for it. I think in the West, we're just so unprepared for grief. We don't do it well. And I guess that's why we've sort of birthed this podcast and Good Grief in general.
Yep. We want to open this conversation.
Yeah. We want to help people process it better.
Yeah.
And so hopefully these conversations are doing that already.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know what advice I'd have to myself again. Yeah. I don't have regrets.
Well, what would be your advice to the listeners if someone's just gone through something tragic?
Take time. Take care of yourself.
However much time that is that you need. It's different for everyone.
And, I can remember sitting with some pastors of ours that had lost their son to cancer. And they were just so transparent with us that, they went on this family trip at the time and, totally got drunk. Right. And so it just gave me permission just to feel things and to be. And that didn't mean I went and got smashed drunk, but you know, it helped during that time. Definitely. I'm not advocating for that, but just
What helped?
Alcohol.
Okay.
It
Yeah.
totally did. And but there are, like I mentioned, so many other things. Yeah. So I'm not advocating for that, but it's just being okay, I think, right? It's just being okay. I'm not a huge drinker, but to know that that's all right, you know, in this time, it served a purpose at that point. Just being okay and not beating yourself up is probably what I'd come back to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the way my mind works is like, I want to do this thing right, but there is no right.
Yeah, I think our listeners need to know it's okay to feel all the things,
Totally.
and nothing that you feel is wrong. It's all validated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, on another note, boxing helped, that's for sure. I bought a boxing bag, and man, that helped. Just punching stuff. If you don't have one, grab a pillow. That works pretty well too.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing your story with us.
Totally cool. I appreciate it.
I wish I could have known your dad.
And likewise with your mum.
But we will get to meet them
Yeah.
one day soon.
We have the hope of glory.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for tuning in. And
Yeah.
we're going to continue to take this deeper. We wanted to start the first 2 episodes with our story so you can get to know a bit of Kaylee
Yeah.
and myself. And from here, we're going to start to dive into some of the topics that surround grief, some of the ugly stuff, some of the weird and wonderful things.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get some guests on. We'll go through their stories and journeys and what has helped them. And yeah, we just want to open up the conversation and help you guys as best as possible.
But if you've only listened to us, come and hang out with us online. We would love that.
Please do.
Where should they come and hang out?
At Good Grief HQ on Instagram.
Totally. And if you know someone that this episode might be helpful for, that's going through grief right now, maybe it was tragic,
Yeah.
why not send it to them? Let's help as many people as we can. Let's open up this conversation.
Yeah, we need you guys. We can't do this all on our own.
Totally.
So we need all the help we can get.
And then finally, leave us a rating, review the podcast or a comment. We would love to know your story.
Yeah, love to hear from you.
And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Big love
Big love.
from the Bowlesers.
Till next time.
Ciao.
Ciao.